How to stop feeling bad. Today I would like to talk how we can stop this feeling of feeling bad. So just before we totally eliminate emotional eating from your lifestyle, let's just admit one thing. It helps you to cope with overwhelming or difficult times, at least in the short term. But it is worth noticing two more things. The first is that you had a need to control how much you felt your emotions. The second is that with time, emotional eating becomes less effective. So there was a tendency to eat more and more, chasing a moment of comfort that became increasingly elusive. So we all know that taking a box of cereal or a tub of ice cream to bed at night is not healthy. One part of us just wants to do it, but the other part knows that the next morning we won't feel good about having eaten a liter of ice cream at midnight. But the middle of the night, it delivers a moment of comfort. For some people, emotional eating happens so often that it becomes a habit of eating too much all the time. They do it again and again, getting more and more frustrated and feeling worse and worse about themselves. Then they get upset that they are overweight, so they eat even more to suppress that feeling, and it becomes a vicious circle, a circle where you just can't get out. The emotional comfort just becomes a blur. It's very, very wazy. The eating happens mindlessly. But emotional eating is not just about controlling painful or uncomfortable feelings. Some emotional eaters automatically reach for the cookie jar whenever any emotion gets too powerful. They eat because they're happy or excited, just as often as they eat because they're lonely and disappointed or bored. So let me just explain a little bit about emotional eating. So I'm going to explain the science behind emotional eating because I think it's very, very important to understand how it all happens. And then I'm also going to talk about how to overcome it in an easy and straightforward way. So as I talk, the information it's available to both the unconscious and the conscious part of your mind. You may find it interesting at a conscious level, and it's also useful to your unconscious mind. So the more your unconscious knows, the more swiftly and efficiently it can use the material you hear in a trance. It will take all it needs to support the changes you're making. Your unconscious is already beginning to build new ways of thinking and processing how you feel. You won't necessarily notice it happening to you, but you will begin to react differently, and you will begin to feel so good on the inside that you don't or you won't want to change how you feel with food. Emotional eating changes how we feel by several different mechanisms. The first is called displacement, and it's an effect of the natural limits of our consciousness. Famously, the psychologist called George Miller, he published a paper in the 50s indicating that the maximum number of objects we can hold in our short-term memory is 7 plus or minus 2. Our awareness has similar limitations. We can only hold in consciousness a few ideas, perceptions, and feelings at once. After a certain point, a new thought, sensation, or emotion takes the place of an earlier one. Eating takes up a lot more of our attention. Even just thinking about food takes up a lot of space in our minds. Some people, they wake up in the morning and they begin planning their meals for the whole day. When we pay attention to what our food looks and smells and tastes and feels like, it can be very absorbing. And in that way, it just doesn't leave any room for other thoughts or feelings. The second mechanism is simply the activity of eating. All the actions of eating are automated. All human beings use muscle memory. In other words, when we repeatedly practice a movement, like tying our shoelaces, it becomes automatic. We just have to start, and our muscles carry on. The same is true of eating. These actions of eating can be deeply familiar and comforting. The chances are that if you are overweight, you eat fast, and you're not even aware of it. The rate at which we eat is determined by muscle memory and our brain chemistry. This system changes your rate of eating. Two very well-known women who used this system, they decided to test my theory, and one lunchtime they had a slow-motion eating contest. I often recommend this to my clients to do it at home with their husband or with their children. What happened with these two women is they laughed as they cut up their food and brought it to their mouth, like an action replay from a football match. However, they were amazed to notice that the next time they went to eat, they automatically ate more slowly and far less. Simply by playing this game once, they repatterned their muscle memory. And thirdly, eating physically interferes with how we register emotions. We have nerve endings in the solar plexus, where we register powerful emotions. Emotions, they originate from the brain, but they can express themselves anywhere in the body. This is why, for example, when we are nervous, we might say we have butterflies in the stomach. The solar plexus lies just above the stomach and the intestines. And when we eat, the sensations from the stomach and the small intestine overlie the signals from the solar plexus, making them appear less intense. Last and most important, eating releases serotonin, also known as the happy brain chemical. When we do have anything that reinforces our survival, such as eating, having sex, or reaching a peak of achievement, we get a release of serotonin. Some people eat excessively because it delivers a serotonin high, even though it is a short-lived peak with significant long-term negative consequences. So I want to talk a little bit about low serotonin because I think it's very, very important to mention this. Some emotional eaters, they have a low background level of serotonin. So others are sensitive to particular contexts that drive down their serotonin. The contexts that people find stressful vary enormously. So that means, for me, a stressful situation can be completely different than for you, for example. And some people, they experience stress at work, have a stash of food they use to manage their stress. Others strive at work, but hit a low moment when they go home in the evening and immediately eat to change how they feel. Yet others are experiencing relationship difficulties or separations and look to food for comfort. And of course, there are those who have eaten too much for whatever reason, but now find their own weight and ill health stressful and eat to deal with that. So we all have different reasons, but the chemistry is the same. So if you have discovered that eating makes you feel better, but that the better feeling fades away after a while, there is a good chance that your serotonin levels are context sensitive or even too low overall. As you have discovered, emotional eating does raise your mood briefly, but the effect doesn't last. What makes people vulnerable to low serotonin levels? So Dr. Ronald Rudin, he has been working in this area for many years, and he believes that the major cause of chronic or repetitive low serotonin levels is one experiencing or more than causes a person to believe. I don't know how to solve this, and I don't know when it's going to end. This could be a single event or trauma, but most people have experienced one little disappointment or emotional pain after another until one day the thought goes through their mind. This hurts, but I don't know what to do. The body codes that as inescapable stress. Under stress, the body lowers the serotonin to free the mind to seek solutions so that we can deal with whatever is causing us stress. If you have low serotonin levels, it's not your fault. It is a result of stressful situations in the past. A huge range of situations can create this outcome, and they are not all easy to recognize. Low serotonin levels cause us to gravitate towards compensatory behavior such as emotional eating. The good news is that the system in this book teaches your body to raise your serotonin levels so that whatever the situation, you remain in control. So if I can talk a little about the research that has been done, because I really like to give you a kind of background why this emotional eating is taking place, for us also to understand better and be more aware of what's going on. So Dr. Rudin's research, it suggests that if you experience a difficult time or trauma in which the stress appears inescapable, certain receptors in the amygdala, the part of the brain that controls our response to stress, are chemically changed so that the pathway of stress response is streamlined. In other words, your brain has become more sensitive to certain stimuli. Any stimulus that creates a situation similar to the one that has perceived as unescapable will trigger the same response. The more often this happens, the more the brain makes associations to this state, shifting the neurochemistry of the brain to a low serotonin landscape. In most cases, people have experienced many different incidents that have accumulated in an encoding that predisposes them to stress. So for some people, stress is a very, very different experience. And as they did experience a lot of stress during their childhood, during their whole life, it's just encoded in their amygdala. So they just react in the same way as if they were much younger. So many different incidents and consequences can appear involved in the triggers for emotional eating. No wonder it can appear so baffling. So we like to think that if life is reasonably pleasant, we should feel okay. In the same way that if we sit in a warm house, we should be comfortably warm. However, when these pathways, they get encoded in the brain, often we don't feel okay because of the low serotonin landscape. In such a state, we seek out other ways to reduce the stress and certain activities, including eating. Because eating, it does relax us. For a lot of people, it relaxes us, even though only temporarily relaxes us. So that's like turning on a heater in the house, but leaving the front door open, so that as soon as we turn the heater off, we feel the cold again. So that means, of course, eating relaxes us and brings us some comfort, but that relaxation, it fades away after a while. It doesn't really last, so it's not a good solution to turn to. So let me talk today about what is really important in stress. So the perception of inescapable stress causes the chemical landscape of the brain to change. Some people have serotonin levels that are lower than others. Others have a level that dips in particular contexts, such as being stressed, which reactivates the response to the original trauma. So both cases shift people from a state in which feeling good is normal and feeling bad is exceptional to the exact opposite. Feeling bad becomes normal, and feeling good requires a specific stimulus. Therefore, we develop all sorts of strategies to cope, but underneath them, all the traumatized response remains, even if we are no longer in a stressful environment. We are left with a chemical landscape in the brain with a tendency to revert to low serotonin whenever we are not actively lifted by environmental factors. I worked with a lawyer who was desperate to lose weight. His practice was highly successful, but also highly stressful. He would work from early in the morning to 4 in the afternoon without a break, without even eating. Then all of a sudden, he would hit a low serotonin point and feel completely out of control. He would order a giant pizza and eat the whole thing in seconds. The first thing I told him was to change how he felt without using food. Then I taught him to pay attention to his body so he would notice if he was hungry before 4 p.m. Within days, he had radically changed his timetable and his eating habits, and he lost weight effortlessly. So let me talk a little bit about these vicious circles. It may be that we experience a situation in our life, in our adult life, in which the stress appears inescapable. This is not necessarily a single event. It could be being stuck in a loveless marriage, doing a job you hate, or caring for a relative without help or holidays. When people suffer from deep permanent stress, they are very likely to seek relief. Some take to emotional eating, some to drugs, drinks, others to shopping or extreme sports. All provide temporary relief. None address the underlying problem. Unfortunately, the activity that provides temporary relief often creates further problems in the long term. Alcoholism, drug addiction, and obesity all seriously threaten health and are thus in themselves inescapable stresses, creating more inescapable trauma and building an increasingly negative vicious circle. Some people end up using food alongside other addictions, which makes the problem appear even more complicated and intractable. Dr. Rudin's work has shown there is a solution. So we all suffer difficult times at a certain point, whether in childhood or later on, although we may not be aware of it at the time. So how come some of us seem to survive without long-term damage and others still seem to be vulnerable? It seems that if we receive genuine loving comfort and if we are distracted from the pain while the trauma or the memory of the trauma is still active, the encoding is not permanent. Our brain returns to its natural resilient state. Mothers do this for their children over and over again. The child gets frightened. The mother picks him or her up, hugs them, and directs their attention to something else while continuing to hug and stroke them. This comforts them, and they know they're safe and have escaped from danger. Without this immediate comforting, the brain may encode the stress. We're traumatized, and the brain fixes the response. If a memory is reactivated, either by a similar stimulus or inadvertent thought, the child releases stress hormones. Dr. Rudin's research has shown that after reactivation of the encoded event, the physical actions of comforting, such as stroking the arms, face and hands, produce an electrical response of delta waves in the brain, which strip away the chemical that was jamming the stress pathway open, thus returning the brain to its normal pre-traumatized state. This is really revolutionary, so that's why I want to share this with you, because we can build up our resilience, even if we're in a high state of stress, and even if our serotonin level is really, really high, by doing this exercise, which I'm going to share with you in a while, and which I'm going to share with you also a video, so you can practice it at home, you will see that this is really revolutionary. The actions of love are not just culturally significant gestures, they affect our physiology. So even today, with thousands of doctors and scientists around the world studying the brain, its actual mechanisms are still only partially understood. However, we do know quite a bit about a type of memory storage called synaptic memory, which is involved in encoding traumatic memories. When something traumatic happens to us, we feel bad and we want to get away. In biological terms, data from our senses is fed to the amygdala, along with the data from the cortex, which ascribes meaning to the event. In the amygdala, neurons are activated, sending neurotransmitters to receptors on other neurons across the synaptic gap. In stressful situations, one particular neurochemical called glutamate is released, which is scooped up by a receptor known as the AMPA receptor, which passes the message on to release the fight and flight response. The AMPA receptor is then reabsorbed. This might all sound very, very scientific, but what happens is if we're in a real high stress alert, this feeling, this emotion goes directly to the amygdala and it gets absorbed as a fight and flight feeling. So I'm sure you already heard from it. The fight and flight response is something natural that's embedded in our brain, because thousands of years ago we were able to react very naturally if, for example, there was a wolf in front of us. That wolf wanted to attack us. So that response went immediately to the amygdala. So blood goes to the arms and to the legs. So we're completely prepared to run or to defend ourselves. But now, in recent times, if we have a highly stressful situation, it still has the same response in our body. So if the traumatic situation is perceived as inescapable, phosphorus is released, which glues the AMPA receptor to the surface of the neuron. This sets the pathway of the stress response permanently to open. So if the event is merely recalled, the thought triggers a reaction as if the event was happening for the first time. Repeating the stress response over time, repeating triggering of stress reduces the base level of serotonin. So again, we're again in that vicious circle. So high stress response, fight or flight response, low serotonin. And if we don't do anything to balance our nervous system, which is separated from the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, from high activity and relaxation, if we don't do anything to balance that nervous system, to stabilize everything, we'll always be in that high alert of stress, which is very easy. That our low serotonin, the serotonin level is quite low. So that's why we are looking for lots of comfort in food, in alcohol, in shopping, in whatever that's convenient for us. So I hope explaining this makes emotional eating a little bit more clear for you. I want to share the good news, because the good news is that the mechanism is reset. It's able to reset your brain's response. It remains available throughout your life. By treating the original underlying cause, the driver for emotional eating can be removed. So even multiple causes and multiple problems can be cured by repeated methodological treatment. Regardless of the cause, this system reduces the emotional overwhelm behind emotional eating and lets you process the emotions safely. So in a nutshell, this system delinks the thought from the feeling so you can remember whatever happened, but the distress is removed. Dr. Rudin has also discovered that there are many ways in which we can become resilient and prevent traumas encoding permanently, regardless of the love and comfort we do or don't receive from the outside. At a physical level, yoga, meditation, and exercise all increase resilience. Clear thinking, the ability to regulate emotional responses, optimism, an active problem-solving approach, and moderation are all positively correlated with resilience. In the next video, I'm going to share with you the Havening technique, a really easy way to stabilize your nervous system and to reset your brain's response. Thank you for listening.